You know her as Cleopatra, the seductress, the woman who bathed in milk, dissolved pearls in wine, and rolled herself up in a carpet to seduce the most powerful man in the world, or so the story goes. The dangerous foreign queen who brought down two Roman heroes with nothing but her body and her ambition. You know that woman. But the woman you think you know was built by the man who destroyed her. Almost everything that comes to mind when you hear her name, the excess, the manipulation, the idea that she was a threat because she was seductive, was written by her enemies after she was dead, when she could no longer argue back. Here's what they don't tell you. Cleopatra spoke 9 languages. She was the first ruler of her dynasty known to have learned the language of the people she ruled. Ancient writers credited her with works on medicine, cosmetics, and measurement. She ran one of the richest economies in the ancient world, and she ran it well, through a currency crisis and a famine. She wasn't dangerous because she was beautiful. Roman coins from her own lifetime show a woman with a hooked nose and a sharp jaw, not a supermodel. She was dangerous because she was smart. Smart enough to survive for almost 20 years, sitting on the one thing every Roman wanted, in a world where Rome took whatever it wanted. That's the part that got erased. Because here's the problem with Cleopatra. She lost. And when you lose to Rome, Rome doesn't just take your kingdom. Rome takes your story. The man who beat her spent the rest of his life making sure that history would remember her exactly the way he needed it to. Not as a queen, not as a strategist, as a warning. A cautionary tale about what happens when a foreign woman gets too close to Roman power. And it worked. It worked so well that 2,000 years later, you still picture the woman his victory needed her to be. So this is not the story of the seductress. This is the story of the strategist, a woman who played the deadliest game on earth, Roman politics, better than almost any man of her age, and nearly won. Who bet her entire kingdom twice on the 2 most powerful men in Rome, and who lost in the end not to a better player, but to a man who realized he didn't have to beat her on the battlefield. He just had to beat her in the story. To understand how a woman that capable ended up remembered as a punchline, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the palace at its height, to the moment it started falling apart. The year is 51 BC Alexandria, one of the greatest cities in the world, wealthier, more cosmopolitan, and more learned than Rome wanted to admit. A city of palaces, ports, temples, and a library that still carried the dream of collecting all human knowledge. And in that city, an 18-year-old girl has just inherited a throne. She has also just inherited a problem her ancestors spent 300 years pretending they could ignore. The problem has a name, and the name is Rome. She is 18. Her father is dead. Her brother is now her husband. He is 10 years old. Her court is full of grown men who smile at her and calculate how long she'll last. And across the sea, the most powerful war machine in the Mediterranean world is watching Egypt the way a creditor watches a debtor who's running out of time. This is what Cleopatra VII inherits in the spring of 51 BC, not power, a countdown. To understand how bad her position is, you have to understand what Egypt had become. 300 years earlier, her family didn't come from Egypt at all. They came from Macedonia, the same rough, hard-drinking kingdom that produced Alexander the Great. When Alexander died, his generals carved up his empire like a carcass. One of them, a man named Ptolemy, grabbed Egypt, and his descendants had ruled it ever since, as Greeks, speaking Greek, marrying their own siblings to keep the bloodline pure, ruling a country whose language most of them never even learned. By the time Cleopatra is born, that dynasty is 3 centuries old and rotting from the inside. Understand what that means. This is a family that treated murder as a succession plan. Cleopatra's ancestors didn't just kill their rivals, they killed their brothers, their sisters, their mothers. Ancient writers claimed that Ptolemy VIII had his young son Ptolemy Memphites murdered and sent the dismembered remains to the boy's mother, Cleopatra II, as a birthday gift. Another had his wife, who was also his sister, killed, then married his other sister. When they ran out of enemies, they turned on each other. It was, quite literally, the family business. So when Cleopatra's father died and left the throne to two of his children at once, Cleopatra, 18, and her brother Ptolemy XIII, 10, he wasn't creating a partnership, he was lighting a fuse, because there was only ever room for one. On paper, they ruled together. They were probably married to each other. That was the Ptolemy way. But a 10-year-old doesn't run a kingdom. The men around him do. And the men around Ptolemy XIII, a eunuch named Pothinus, the boy king's regent and administrator, a general named Achilles, a tutor named Theodotus of Chios, those men looked at an 18-year-old queen who was smart, popular, and impossible to control, and they saw a problem to be solved. Cleopatra saw it coming. She moved first. Coins carried her image, and official documents began to list her as sole ruler. She was making a statement. This is my throne, not ours. It was a bold move. It was also a mistake, because she'd just told the most dangerous men in Egypt exactly what she intended to do before she had the power to defend it. They pushed back. Hard. By late 49 BC, 2 years into her reign, Cleopatra had lost. Pothinus and his faction drove her out of Alexandria. The queen who'd tried to rule alone was now a fugitive, running for the eastern frontier, raising an army in the desert, trying to figure out how to take back a throne that had already been taken from her. She was 20 years old. She had a rival brother backed by the royal treasury and the royal army, and she had, at most, a few thousand loyal men in a desert camp. By every rational measure, it was over. But she didn't run for a foreign court, and she didn't disappear. She sat in that desert camp and did the math. Because she understood something her brother's handlers didn't. In this world, the throne of Egypt was no longer decided in Egypt. It was decided by whoever held the real power now, and that power was Roman. If she wanted her kingdom back, she wasn't going to win it with her few thousand men. She was going to have to win a Roman. She just didn't know yet which one, or how soon the chance would come. Here's something worth stopping on. Before we watch her make her move, look at what she was actually fighting to keep. Because the Egypt she inherited wasn't just politically unstable, it was broke. Her father, Ptolemy XII, the one they nicknamed the flute player, had spent years buying Roman support to stay on his throne, and Roman support was expensive. He borrowed staggering sums from Roman financiers at brutal interest and mortgaged the wealth of Egypt to pay for it. By the time he died, one of the great grain lifelines of the Mediterranean was drowning in debt to the very power that was circling it. And then the Nile did the one thing Egypt could not survive. It ran low. Egypt lived and died by the flood. Every summer, the Nile rose and spread black silt across the fields, and that silt was the reason Egypt could grow grain when other parts of the ancient world went hungry. But the flood didn't always come. And in Cleopatra's early reign, the river ran low. Anyone watching the river gauges could see the danger. The water was falling short of what a good inundation should have been. Fields that should have been black mud stayed cracked and pale. The royal grain supply came under pressure, and in the streets, food grew harder to afford. You could see the same strain in the money itself. After years of debasement, many of the coins passing hand to hand carried far less silver than Ptolemaic silver once had, so that a Ptolemy's face on a coin no longer promised what it once had. So picture what she's actually holding. A treasury bled dry by her father, a coinage already cut down in silver, grain reserves under pressure, a little brother whose handlers want her dead, and a republic across the sea that owns her family's debt and is looking for any excuse to collect. This is the throne she just risked everything to rule alone. You might ask why. Why fight this hard for a kingdom this broken? Why not run somewhere safe? Because she wasn't Egyptian by blood, but she was Egyptian in the one way that mattered. This was hers. 300 years of her family had ruled from Alexandria, and she was not going to be the Ptolemy who lost it. Not to her brother, not to his handlers, and not, if she could help it, to Rome. But she couldn't hold it alone. She'd already proven that, driven into the desert with a few thousand men while her brother sat on the throne in Alexandria with the army, the treasury, and the capital. She needed power she didn't have. And in the ancient world, there was only one place that kind of power lived now. Not in Egypt, in Rome. For months, she waited on the edge of Egypt, gathering men, watching Alexandria from a distance, and looking for the one thing she did not have, a force stronger than her brother's court. So when she heard that Julius Caesar himself had landed in Alexandria, Caesar, the most powerful Roman alive, chasing his rival Pompey into Egypt, she didn't see an occupier. She saw an opportunity. The one man on earth who could hand her back her throne was sitting in her own palace. She just had to get to him, past her brother's guards, past the men who wanted her dead, into a palace she'd been exiled from. And the way she chose to do it became the most famous entrance in history. The chance she'd been waiting for came from outside Egypt entirely. In the autumn of 48 BC, the Roman Civil War washed up on Egypt's shore. Two of the most powerful Romans who ever lived, Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, once allies, now enemies, had spent years tearing the Republic apart for control of the entire Roman world. Caesar had won the decisive battle. Pompey, beaten, ran. And of all the places on earth he could have fled to, he ran to Egypt, because Egypt owed him. Years earlier, Pompey had helped Cleopatra's father hold his throne. Pompey expected sanctuary. What he got was a knife. Cleopatra's brother, or rather, the men running her brother, made a calculation. Caesar was the winner now, so they'd do Caesar a favor. When Pompey's boat reached the shore, they murdered him, cut off his head. And when Caesar arrived days later, chasing his enemy, they presented it to him as a gift. They had badly misread the man. Ancient accounts say Caesar wept. Whatever Pompey had become, he had once been Caesar's ally, his son-in-law, a Roman consul. And these Egyptian courtiers had butchered him like an animal to score points. Caesar was disgusted. And now he was here, in Alexandria, in the royal palace, with a small force of Roman soldiers and every intention of collecting the enormous debt Egypt still owed Rome. This is the moment Cleopatra had been waiting for. Think about the situation from her side. The most powerful man in the Roman world is sitting in her palace. He is angry at her brother's faction. He has the authority to settle the question of Egypt's throne with a single decision. If she can get to him, if she can make her case before her brother's men make theirs, she might win back everything. But there was a problem. She couldn't just walk in. Her brother controlled Alexandria. The palace was surrounded by men who would kill her on sight. Sending a message wasn't enough. Her brother's people would intercept it, or out-argue it, or simply outlast it. She had to get her body into that room, in person, alive. So, according to the story, she had herself smuggled in, wrapped in a bedroll or a sack for bedding, carried past the guards by a single loyal servant, and delivered to Caesar's quarters. When the bundle was untied, the Queen of Egypt stepped out of it. That's the legend, and it may be exactly that, a legend. But strip away the romance and look at what it actually was. A 21-year-old woman, deposed, outgunned, and hunted, who found the one way to get past an army by turning herself into a package small enough to carry. It wasn't seduction, it was infiltration. She got herself behind enemy lines with nothing but nerve and a good idea, and here's where the Roman version and the truth split apart for the first time. The story Rome would later tell is that she seduced Caesar, that she used her body to bend a 52-year-old man to her will. That's the version that survived, the exotic temptress and the great Roman brought low by desire. But look at what Caesar actually got out of the deal. He got a compliant, grateful ruler on the throne of one of the richest kingdoms in the Mediterranean. He got Egypt's grain and Egypt's gold on his side in a civil war he was still fighting. Backing Cleopatra wasn't Caesar losing his head to a beautiful woman. It was one of the shrewdest political operators in Rome deciding that a queen who owed him everything was worth more than a boy king whose advisors had just handed him a severed head. They used each other. That's what an alliance is. The idea that only one of them was doing the manipulating. That's not history. That's propaganda. And it was written later by people who needed her to be the villain. Caesar backed her. There was a war for it. The boy king's faction didn't give up Alexandria easily, and for months Caesar and Cleopatra were besieged in the palace quarter. But when it ended, Ptolemy XIII was dead, drowned in the Nile in flight, and Cleopatra had what she'd gambled everything for, her throne, restored by the most powerful man in the world, and something else, too. By the time Caesar left Egypt, Cleopatra may already have been pregnant. She would name the boy Caesarion, Little Caesar. A son who, in her mind, might one day link Egypt and Rome not as debtor and collector, but as equals, as family. It was the boldest bet of her life, and for a few short years it looked like it might pay off. But bets on powerful men have a flaw. The man can die, and in Rome, a group of senators was already sharpening the knives. For a while it worked. By 46 BC, Cleopatra was in Rome, not as a prisoner, as a guest. Caesar had won his civil war, made himself dictator, and installed the Queen of Egypt in a villa across the Tiber. Caesarion would later be with her in Rome too, the child she presented to the world as Caesar's son. Think about how far she'd come. 3 years earlier, she'd been hiding in a desert camp, counting the few thousand men still loyal to her. Now she was living in the city that claimed the right to decide the fate of kingdoms, with the most powerful man alive as her protector and the father of her child. But her position in Rome was more fragile than it looked, and this is where you can already see the shape of what would destroy her. Because Rome hated her, not for anything she'd done, for what she was. She was a queen, and Rome had thrown out its last king centuries earlier, and built its whole identity on the idea that no one man should ever wear a crown. She was a foreign monarch, living openly with their dictator. She was rich in a way that made Roman senators feel small, and there were rumors that Caesar meant to make himself king, that he'd move the capital to Alexandria, that this Eastern queen was whispering monarchy into his ear. None of that had to be true to be dangerous. It just had to be believed, and that's the pattern. Years before Octavian ever made her his enemy, Rome had already decided what a woman like Cleopatra meant: a queen, a foreigner, a corrupting influence on good Roman men. The story that would eventually bury her was already being written in the gossip of the Roman elite. She just didn't know yet how deadly it would become. Then, on the 15th of March, 44 BC, it all came apart in a single morning. Julius Caesar walked into a Senate meeting and a mob of senators closed around him with knives. The dictator who had conquered Gaul and won a civil war and made himself the master of Rome died on the Senate floor, stabbed 23 times by men who called themselves patriots. They thought they were saving the Republic. For Cleopatra, sitting in her villa across the river, it was catastrophe. Everything she had rested on one man. Her throne, restored by Caesar. Her safety in Rome, guaranteed by Caesar. Her son's future, tied to Caesar's name. And in one morning, Caesar was a body on a marble floor, and every promise attached to him was worth nothing. Worse, she was now exposed. She was the dictator's foreign mistress in a city that had just murdered the dictator for getting too powerful. Caesar's will named his teenage great-nephew Octavian as his heir. It did not name Cleopatra. It did not name Caesarion. Her son, the child she'd imagined might one day join Egypt and Rome, was, in Roman eyes, nobody, an illegitimate half-Egyptian boy with no claim to anything. She didn't wait to see how the chaos would settle. She got out. She took her son and sailed back to Egypt, back to the one place she was still a queen, and started doing the math on survival all over again. She was around 25 years old. She had gambled everything on the most powerful man in the world, and for a few years she had won. Now he was dead, and she was almost exactly where she'd started, a queen on a rich, weak throne, with Rome looming over her, needing to find a way to survive whatever came next. And what came next was a scramble for Caesar's power among his heirs. One of them was a soldier, Caesar's right hand, a hard-drinking, charismatic general the legions loved. His name was Mark Antony, and within a few years he would summon the Queen of Egypt to answer for herself. 3 years after Caesar's murder, the Roman world had sorted itself into a rough, unstable peace. Caesar's power had been split among three men. Lepidus held Africa, but the story was already narrowing to two. Caesar's teenage heir, Octavian, who took the west, and his old right hand, Mark Antony, who took the east. And the east included Egypt, which meant that Cleopatra's kingdom now sat inside the territory of Mark Antony. If she wanted a Roman protector again, and she needed one, because nothing about her situation had changed, Egypt was still wealthy and still could not defend itself. Antony was the only game left. In 41 BC, Antony summoned her. He was preparing for war against Parthia, Rome's great rival in the east, and for that, he needed money, ships, grain, and allies. Egypt had all of those. He also wanted to know where she'd stood in the chaos after Caesar's death, whether she'd helped his enemies. So he sent orders. Come to Tarsus, in what's now southern Turkey, and explain yourself. Now watch what she does with that summons. Because this is Cleopatra at the height of her powers, and it is the exact opposite of the helpless seductress in the legend. She was being called to account like a suspect, so she refused to arrive like one. She took her time. She made Antony wait. And when she finally came up the river to Tarsus, she came in a way designed to rewrite the entire meeting before a word was spoken. Plutarch says it was a gilded barge, purple sails, silver oars, herself dressed as Aphrodite, Venus to the Romans, the goddess of love, reclining under a canopy while attendants dressed as Cupids fanned her. The story says the whole city emptied out to watch her arrive, until Antony was left sitting alone in the marketplace, the guest of honor at his own reception with no audience left. Here's the thing most people miss about that scene. It gets remembered as seduction, the queen using sex to snare another Roman. But look at what it actually was. Political theater, staged with total precision. Antony had summoned her to judge her. She arrived as a living goddess, so overwhelming that she flipped the power in the room before the conversation even started. She wasn't the accused anymore. She was the spectacle everyone, including Antony, had come to see. She spent a fortune to make one point. I am not a subject you interrogate. I am a power you deal with. And it worked. Antony, a big, physical, hard-drinking soldier who loved a grand gesture, was completely outmatched by it. He'd expected a nervous client queen. He got a performance worthy of the gods. By the end, it was Antony following Cleopatra, back to Alexandria, where he spent the winter as her guest. Now, the Roman story of what followed is simple and damning. Antony, a Roman hero, was seduced by an Eastern queen, drowned in luxury, and turned into her puppet. That's the version Octavian would spend the next decade selling, and it's the version that stuck. But strip out the propaganda, and it's the same move she'd made with Caesar, an alliance. Cleopatra got the Roman protection her throne needed to survive. Antony got the wealth of Egypt to fund his war and his rivalry with Octavian. The difference this time was that they were also, by every account, genuinely drawn to each other. But even that was never only romance. It was two people who each held exactly what the other needed, deciding to bind their fortunes together. The difference between them and Caesar was the stakes. Caesar had been the master of Rome. Antony was one of two men fighting to become that, and the other man, Octavian, was patient, cold, and very good at controlling how a story got told. Cleopatra had bet on a powerful Roman once and lost him to a knife. Now she was betting again on a man locked in a rivalry he might not win. And this time, when the bet went bad, she wouldn't just lose a protector, she'd lose everything. For a while, the alliance held, and it looked like the smartest bet she'd ever made. But there was a complication, and her name was Octavia. To patch up their rivalry, Antony and Octavian had struck a deal, and the deal was sealed the way Roman deals often were, with a marriage. Antony married Octavian's sister, Octavia. By all accounts, she was intelligent, loyal, and dignified, genuinely one of the most respected women in Rome. On paper, this marriage was supposed to bind the two most powerful men in the Roman world together as brothers. So now, hold the situation in your head, because Octavian will use every piece of it later. Antony has a Roman wife, Octavian's own sister, sitting in Rome, and he has Cleopatra in the east, with whom he now has children. Twins, a boy and a girl, and later another son. Antony is in effect living two lives, a Roman one on paper, an Eastern one in fact. For years he tried to have both. He'd spend time with Octavia, then return east to his campaigns, and to Cleopatra. But his great war against Parthia went badly, cost him tens of thousands of men, and left him more dependent than ever on Egypt's money and Cleopatra's support. Slowly, his center of gravity shifted east, to Alexandria, to her. And then he did something that handed Octavian the weapon he'd been waiting for. In 34 BC, in Alexandria, Antony staged a grand public ceremony. Cleopatra was presented as the goddess Isis. Antony sat beside her, and in front of a crowd, he handed out kingdoms. He confirmed Cleopatra and Caesarion as rulers of Egypt and Cyprus, and gave Caesarion the grand title, King of Kings. He named his own children with Cleopatra kings and queens over a map of eastern territories: Armenia, Media, Parthia, Cyrenaica, Libya, Syria, Phoenicia, Cilicia, some of which Rome controlled, some of which Parthia controlled, and some of which were more claim than reality. And crucially, he acknowledged Caesarion as the true son of Julius Caesar. Historians call it the donations of Alexandria, and you have to understand how it looked from two different angles, because that gap is the whole story. From Cleopatra's side, this may have been mostly symbolic, a grand Eastern pageant asserting her dynasty's prestige and her children's futures, the kind of ceremonial kingship the East had staged for centuries. But from Rome's side, or at least from the side Octavian was ready to argue, it looked like treason. Here was a Roman commander, dressed for an Eastern court, giving away Roman lands to his foreign mistress and her children. And worse, by calling Caesarion the real son of Caesar, Antony was pointing a dagger straight at Octavian, whose entire power rested on being Caesar's chosen heir. If there was a genuine son of Caesar out there, what did that make Octavian? Octavian didn't need the donations to be a real threat. He needed them to look like one, and they looked perfect. This is the moment the long, quiet campaign against Cleopatra stopped being gossip and became a weapon of state. For years, Rome had whispered about the dangerous foreign queen. Now Octavian had a public event he could point to and say, Look what she's turned him into. He's not a Roman general anymore. He's the consort of an Egyptian queen, giving away your empire to her children. Notice what he did there, and it's the same move that would define how history remembered her. He made it about her, not Antony's ambition, not a civil war between two Roman warlords over who would rule Rome, which is what it actually was. He reframed the whole conflict as Rome versus Cleopatra, a foreign woman who had bewitched a good Roman and now threatened Rome itself. It was brilliant. Because Romans would never rally to a war against Antony, he was one of their own, a hero, and civil war was exhausting and shameful. But a war against a foreign queen who was corrupting a Roman hero, that they could get behind. Cleopatra had spent her whole life being smarter than the men around her, but Octavian had just found the one game she couldn't win. He wasn't going to fight her for Egypt. He was going to fight her for the story, and he was going to make her the villain of it. This is the chapter where Cleopatra loses, not on a battlefield that comes later. Here, in Rome, in the story Octavian told about her. By 33 BC, the alliance between Octavian and Antony was finished. The two men were headed for war, and everyone knew it. But Octavian had a problem, and it was a serious one. He could not, out loud, declare war on Antony, because Antony was a Roman, a famous one, a former consul, a war hero, a man with huge support among the Roman people and the legions. Declaring war on Antony meant civil war, Roman legions killing Roman legions, and Rome was sick to death of civil war. It had already torn the Republic apart again and again within living memory. If Octavian marched on Antony, he'd look like just another warlord grabbing for power, and half of Rome would side against him. So Octavian did something much cleverer. He decided not to fight Antony at all. He'd fight Cleopatra, and to do that he needed proof that the danger was real. He found it, or manufactured it, in Antony's own will. Antony's will was held, as many were, by the Vestal virgins in Rome, sacred, untouchable, legally protected. Octavian went and took it anyway, seizing it was widely seen as sacrilegious and legally dubious, a violation of everything Roman culture claimed to hold sacred about those documents. He didn't care. He took the will, brought it before the Senate, and read it aloud. Whether he read it honestly, we'll never know. What mattered was what Octavian made Rome hear, that Antony wanted to be buried in Alexandria, next to Cleopatra, that he recognized Caesarion as Caesar's true son, that he had turned Eastern kingdoms and Roman claims into inheritances for a foreign queen and her children. To Roman ears, this was horrifying. A Roman general who wanted to be buried in Egypt instead of Rome, who put an Eastern queen above his own city. It seemed to prove everything Octavian had been saying. Antony wasn't Antony anymore. He'd been swallowed by her. And that was the point. Every accusation landed not on Antony, the Roman, one of their own, but on Cleopatra. She was the witch who'd done this. She was the foreign contamination. Antony was just her victim, a good Roman drowned in Eastern perfume and ambition. Listen to what Octavian and his allies actually put into the air about her, that she was drunk on fortune, that she wanted to destroy Rome and rule it from Alexandria, that she'd bewitched not one, but two of Rome's greatest men. In the poetry written under Octavian's shadow, she became the fatal monstrum, the fatal monster, a mad queen plotting ruin for the capital, surrounded by eunuchs and idolatry. Almost none of it was true. It didn't have to be. It only had to be repeated. And here's the part that decided everything you think you know about her. Cleopatra could not answer any of it. She was in Alexandria. She had no voice in the Roman Senate, no voice in the Roman street. Every charge against her was made in a city she couldn't enter, in a language of politics she was locked out of, by a man who controlled who got to speak. She was being tried in her absence for the crime of being a powerful foreign woman, and the verdict was reached before she could say a single word in her own defense. Then Octavian made it official. In 32 BC, he had Rome declare war, formally, publicly, on Cleopatra, on her, not on Antony. The war was declared against the Queen of Egypt, as if Antony were simply a Roman who'd wandered onto the wrong side and would surely come to his senses. Think about how total that victory was. Before a single ship had sailed, Octavian had taken a naked power struggle between two Roman warlords, himself and Antony, fighting over who would rule Rome, and rewritten it completely. Now it was a noble Roman defending civilization against a monstrous foreign queen. He'd erased Antony's ambition, erased his own, and put all of it onto her. That is the story that won. Not just the war, the story. After Actium, after Egypt fell, the man who would become Augustus didn't just control the legions. He shaped the historians, patronized the poets, and built the official memory of what had happened. The version of Cleopatra that came down through 2,000 years, the seductress, the schemer, the foreign temptress who destroyed great men, is his version. The propaganda outlived the woman herself. She'd outthought a boy king and his handlers. She'd won over Julius Caesar. She'd turned a summons from Antony into a coronation. She had played the game of powerful men better than almost anyone of her age. But Octavian had changed the game. He wasn't playing for Egypt or even for power. He was playing for the story, for the right to say what all of this had meant. And that was the one arena she could never reach. The war hadn't even been fought yet, and she had already lost the battle that mattered most. Now they just had to fight the one with the ships. The war everyone had been expecting finally came in 31 BC, and it came at sea off the western coast of Greece at a place called Actium. On paper, Antony and Cleopatra should have had a chance. They had a large fleet, a large army, and the wealth of Egypt behind them. But the months leading up to the battle went badly. Octavian's admiral, a brilliant commander named Agrippa, outmaneuvered them, cutting their supply lines and bottling their fleet up in a gulf. Disease crept through Antony's camp. Food ran short. And Antony's allies, the kings and commanders who joined him, began to read the situation and slip away. Some defected straight to Octavian. This is worth pausing on because it echoes something. Just as Rome had built a story that erased Antony's ambition and blamed the woman, now Antony's own coalition was falling apart around him. Not through any one dramatic betrayal, but through dozens of quiet calculations by men deciding he was going to lose. By the time the fleets met on the 2nd of September, 31 BC, Antony's position was already crumbling. What happened in the battle itself is still debated, but the broad shape is this. The fighting was hard and uncertain. And at a critical moment, Cleopatra's squadron, around 60 Egyptian ships held in reserve, raised their sails, broke through a gap in the fighting, and headed for the open sea, back toward Egypt. Antony, seeing her go, abandoned his own flagship, transferred to a smaller, faster vessel, and followed her. To the Roman storytellers, this was gold. This was everything they'd been saying about her, proven in a single moment. The foreign queen had fled in the middle of battle, and the once great Roman general had chased after her like a lovesick fool, abandoning his own men to die, the seductress leading the hero to ruin. It practically wrote itself. But look at it more carefully, the way a soldier would. There's a strong case that this wasn't panic, and it wasn't abandonment. It was a plan. Their position at Actium was already failing, supplies cut, allies deserting, the fleet trapped. A breakout may have been the intended strategy all along. Punch a hole, get the core of the fleet and the war treasury Cleopatra was carrying out to safety, and live to fight another day from Egypt. Ships loaded with treasure and sails kept ready suggest preparation, not sudden flight. We don't know for certain what was in their heads, but notice how the two versions serve two different purposes. She panicked and fled, and he followed her like a slave to passion. That's the story that makes her the villain and him the fool. They executed a breakout to save the fleet and the treasury when their position was collapsing. That's the story a military historian might tell. Same ships, same sails, same open water. Completely different meaning depending on who's telling it. What isn't in doubt is the result. Actium was a disaster. The fleet that stayed behind surrendered or was captured. Antony's army, waiting on land, watched their commander disappear over the horizon and, over the following days and weeks, gave up and went over to Octavian. The effect was total. Antony and Cleopatra escaped to Egypt with their lives and some of their treasure. But they had lost the initiative, and with it, almost any realistic chance of winning the war. Their forces melted away, their allies were gone. So picture the two of them sailing back into Alexandria, the richest court in the world, the banquets, the palace on the harbor, all of it still standing, and both of them knowing that none of it was theirs anymore. Not rulers planning a comeback, a queen and a general coming home to wait for the end. And Octavian was in no hurry to give it to them. He had already won the war that mattered, at Actium and in the Senate. Egypt would keep. When he finally came for it, he wouldn't just be coming to take a kingdom. He'd be coming for Cleopatra herself, and he wanted her taken in a very particular way, alive. For almost a year after Actium, the final blow did not come. That delay was its own kind of cruelty. Octavian could afford not to hurry. He settled his veterans. He moved through the eastern provinces, and one by one, the men who'd sworn loyalty to Antony came to kneel in front of him instead. The most telling of them was Herod, the king of Judea. Herod had won his crown with Antony's crucial backing, and yet he traveled to Rhodes to meet Octavian and, according to Josephus, said it plainly. He had been loyal to Antony, and he would be exactly that loyal to Octavian now. Octavian let him keep his throne. That was the message rippling across the East all through that year, carried to Alexandria by every new report. The Allies were changing sides, and Antony's name was already being spoken of in the past tense. And so Octavian let Antony and Cleopatra sit in their palace through the winter and into the summer, watching the world abandon them one messenger at a time. The army Antony hoped to rally in the West refused him. Every week the circle drew tighter, and there was less and less either of them could do except bargain, prepare, and wait. They spent that last stretch of time in different ways, and the contrast tells you who they'd become. Antony, the soldier, seems to have sunk into despair, drinking, brooding, a general with no army left to command. Cleopatra, the strategist, did what she'd done her entire life. She kept working the problem. She sent messages to Octavian, not for herself at first, for her children. She'd spent her whole life playing for the survival of her dynasty, and even now, with everything lost, she was still trying to salvage something. A throne for her son, a future for her kids, some version of Egypt continuing after her. She also seems to have prepared for the possibility that she wouldn't survive this, gathering treasure in the monument she had built, keeping one last bargaining chip in her hands. In the summer of 30 BC, Octavian finally marched on Egypt. Alexandria's defense collapsed quickly. Antony managed one last small cavalry success, a final flash of the soldier he'd once been, but then the pattern returned. His ships went over to Octavian. His cavalry followed. His infantry was beaten back into the city. It was finished. There was no army left. There was no ally left. There was only the waiting, and now even that was over. And then came the moment the Roman storytellers would savor. A message reached Antony that Cleopatra was dead. It was wrong. In the ancient accounts, she had shut herself inside her monument and sent word that she was gone. Whether this was panic, calculation, or something distorted in the telling, we don't know. But Antony believed it. And, believing that she was gone, that the world he'd thrown everything away for was already ending, he did what a defeated Roman general was expected to do. He fell on his own sword. But he didn't die at once, and while he lay dying, a second message came. She was alive, in her tomb. So they carried him there, bleeding, half-conscious, and, in Plutarch's account, hauled him up with ropes through an upper opening because she'd sealed herself inside and would not open the doors. And Antony died there, in her arms, inside the monument she'd turned into her last place of refuge. Strip away 20 centuries of romance, and you're left with something brutally simple. Two people who'd bet the world on each other and lost. One of them dead over a message that wasn't even true. The other now completely alone, sealed in a tomb, with the conqueror's men already at the door. Because that's who came next. Not a mourner. Octavian's agents, and they did not come to let her grieve. They came because Octavian needed her alive. For a few days, Cleopatra and Octavian played out one last negotiation, and it's worth watching, because even here, captured, widowed, her kingdom gone, she was still doing what she'd always done, reading the man across from her and looking for a move. According to the ancient accounts, they met. Octavian was careful, polite, reassuring. He told her not to worry, and she seemed, at least, to play along, discussing her treasure, her children, her future. Some accounts have her trying the old approach, appealing to him the way she had to Caesar and Antony. If she did, it went nowhere. Octavian was not Caesar, and he was not Antony. He was cold, disciplined, and by every sign, focused on one thing, getting her to Rome alive. Because she understood by now exactly what he intended. She had learned, probably deliberately allowed to learn, that Octavian planned to send her to Rome for his triumph. She would be paraded through the streets in chains. The great queen, the living goddess, the woman who had negotiated with the masters of the world as an equal, dragged through Rome as a trophy while the crowd jeered at the monster Octavian's propaganda had made of her. She knew what a Roman triumph did to captured royalty. Her own sister, Arsinoe, years earlier, had been paraded in one. She knew the script, and she decided she would not play the part written for her. This is the part of her story that even the Romans couldn't twist into weakness, though they tried. In the late summer of 30 BC, Cleopatra arranged her own death. How she did it, we don't actually know. The famous version, the one that's launched 1,000 paintings, is the asp, a venomous snake, probably imagined as an Egyptian cobra, smuggled to her hidden in a basket of figs, pressed to her skin so its bite would carry her out. If that version is true, it's a fittingly symbolic death. The cobra, as the uraeus, was a symbol of Egyptian royalty, worn on the crowns of the pharaohs, death by the emblem of her own throne. But ancient writers themselves weren't sure. Some said snake. Some said poison, that she used a hollow comb or a pin dipped in something lethal, or a poison she'd prepared in advance. The truth is that no one who wrote it down actually knew, and the snake may have survived because it made the best story. What isn't in doubt is that she planned it, controlled it, and carried it out. Ancient accounts say her two most loyal servants, Eris and Charmian, died with her. When Octavian's men broke into the chamber, they were too late. Ancient accounts picture the Queen of Egypt dead in royal dress, the diadem still being set in place, arranged exactly as she wanted to be found. Not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, as a queen, on her own terms, in her own country. Octavian had beaten her at everything: the war, the alliances, the story. He had taken her kingdom, her protector, her armies, and he would take the future she'd planned for her children. There was only one thing in the whole world he still wanted from her that he had not yet gotten: her, alive, in his triumph. And that was the one thing she made sure he would never have. It's a small victory, measured against everything she lost. She still died defeated. Egypt was still swallowed. In the story most of the world inherited, her version of events stayed buried under his. But in the last hours of her life, facing the one man who had outmaneuvered her at every turn, she found the single move he couldn't counter. He wanted her story to end with her humiliation in Rome. She ended it in Alexandria instead. Cleopatra was dead, but Octavian had loose ends. And the way he tied them up tells you everything about what this war had really been for. There was still a son of Julius Caesar alive, Caesarion. Cleopatra's oldest child, around 17 years old, the boy she'd once imagined might join Egypt and Rome as equals. She had tried to save him, sent him away toward the Red Sea route with money and guardians, hoping to get him out of Octavian's reach. It didn't work. Caesarion was caught, or lured back, and Octavian had him killed, because Octavian's entire power came from one fact, that he was Caesar's heir, Caesar's son by adoption, and a living boy who was Caesar's son by blood. That was a threat he could not allow to exist. One of his advisors is said to have summed it up with a grim pun on a line from Homer: "Too many Caesars is not good." So the last pharaoh of Egypt, the son of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, was put to death to protect the man rewriting history. The other children, the three she'd had with Antony, Octavian spared. He brought them to Rome, and in a final irony, ancient accounts say they were raised by Octavia, Antony's Roman wife. The woman Antony had left for Cleopatra took in Cleopatra's children and raised them as her own. Their daughter, Cleopatra Selene, survived all of it. She grew up, married Juba II of Mauritania, and became a respected queen in her own right. A thread of Cleopatra's blood and Cleopatra's name lived on, far from Egypt, long after the throne was gone. But the throne was gone. With Caesarion dead, Ptolemaic rule in Egypt ended. Nearly 300 years of the dynasty that had ruled from Alexandria since the days after Alexander the Great finished. Egypt, the ancient kingdom that had been old when Rome was young, was seized by Octavian as his personal possession and would be settled as an imperial province, ruled not by a senator, but by a prefect. Its grain fed Rome, its wealth fed him. The prize the whole war had been fought for, finally and completely, was his. And Octavian himself. He went home, and a few years later the Senate gave him a new name. Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The republic that his rivals had died claiming to defend was over, replaced by one-man rule, the very thing Rome had accused Cleopatra of wanting. He would rule for more than 40 years, and he would spend those decades shaping how history recorded his version of events, including her. And it worked. That's the hard truth this whole story keeps circling back to. It worked so well that, in the story most of the world inherited, Cleopatra has meant exactly what Augustus needed it to mean. The seductress, the schemer, the exotic temptress who brought down great men, not the administrator, not the strategist, not the last ruler to fight with everything she had to keep her country out of Roman hands. The woman got buried, the caricature survived. But here's the thing about buried things. They don't always stay buried. Because we can go back now, we can read the coins that show a sharp-faced, strong-nosed woman instead of a pin-up. We can look at the records of a queen who, by ancient accounts, spoke many languages, steadied a shaken economy, and outplayed Rome's most powerful men for the better part of 2 decades, until she met the one who chose to beat her with a story instead of a sword. We can notice that almost everything ugly ever said about her traces back to the man who needed her destroyed, or to the writers who worked in his shadow. She lost the war. She lost her throne, the future she'd planned for her children, her life. And for 2,000 years, she lost the story too. But the story isn't finished. It's just finally being read by people who don't work for Augustus. You know her as Cleopatra, the seductress, the cautionary tale. Now you know something else, the woman they turned into that caricature, and the queen underneath, the one Rome had to destroy twice, once with an army, and once with a story. The army she couldn't beat, the story we can still take back.